Good morning. So going to bring another topic to the table, and that is the 2022 budget. So we'll walk through, as the bishop has described for us, looking at it from a synod perspective. We've approached this in this presentation from a governance perspective, and that is looking at the strategy and looking at how this goes from a governance perspective. Synod Council, of course, having the management around this, but as we move forward, we are looking from this presentation to really be focused around the governance elements. So I just, first of all, begin with our vision and strategy, which of course we've been working with for the last number of years, and actually it's back to Synod 2016. And that is the focus as budget is worked and prepared around investing in ministry, mission-driven stewardship, and serving communities, all rooted in the gospel of Christ, and with all of us being connected and engaged to make that work. And again, the common image of building our future. And as we do that, we've sown seeds, that we've prepared the ground, and we've nurtured those roots. This is about us moving from maintenance to mission. That's been a real focus for us, is stopping doing some of the things that were just maintenance and be more focused on mission. And partly from looking at it from a financial perspective, we need that financial diligence and restructuring to be able to support that. So this has been a journey. The bishop last night in his charge reflected that this has been a journey. That with the three priorities when he began, right? And one of them was financial. And it was urgent when we started. The diocese had a $250,000 deficit and was headed in the wrong direction. So there was a lot of work and focus put in by a lot of very talented people beginning in 2011. Through those times, it's been a journey. There's been cuts and closures and suspensions. There have been consolidations. There's been reinvention of things, new ways of doing old things. There's been avoidance of expenses. And there's been a shift from maintenance and administration to try to shift more into ministry. And then, of course, we all know we were hit with a pandemic in March of 2020. So when we talk about driving efficiencies and cost reductions, we've done a lot of things in the diocesan office. Some of those things have happened out of natural things with retirements. Some of it's happened through distinct decisions that have been made, but we have restructured, we've evolved roles, we've changed job descriptions, and worked our way through. We've started to implement more in terms of technology and our infrastructure to be able to do things, and our communication structures. We've improved our software, not only with things like our finance systems, but we now have an HR system. We now have process and tools in place for a lot of things around the governance of the diocese and the management of our capabilities. We've been very careful managing suppliers and partners, and we do see that some are suppliers, but we also have partners, the people that have longer-term, larger arrangements with us. For example, our landlord is a partner. We work with them, and they also have been very generous, for example, with our giving us from their foundation. So there's been a number of ways that we have partners, that we evolve, we review, and we continue to manage. And of course, as there is everywhere, a focus on discretionary spending, things that at a given moment in time you can choose. And a good example of that is travel. Some of that's been easy because we've not been able to travel. One of the big challenges we had, apart from the overall cost structure, was that there was certain elements of our financials that were unpredictable. In the Camp Hyanto is a good example. Once you made the decision to operate for the year, regardless of how much money you put in as a grant, support, or deficit coverage, you at that point became whatever happened, happened. As the summer went, whatever the financial impact was, you had to basically integrate what happened in the end. So it's somewhat unpredictable, and to a level uncontrollable. Similarly, the church book room, very much driven by top-line expenses, top-line decisions on income and revenue, as much as being driven by trying to manage costs. So that also caused, even though you may assign a certain amount in the budget, it's an operational thing that has a lot of variables. And then finally, the Diocesan Center, obviously in terms of things like the weather, how hot or cold, how much power we burned, but more importantly, capital expenses. And we were beginning to look at some very large capital expenses. Some you plan and you can plan for. Others, of course, drop in on you unexpectedly. So there were distinct decisions that were reached. And that involved ending ministries. So Camp Hyanto, as you know, was restructured. There was an attempt made. It was presented at Synod 2020 or 2018 that we were just not successful in rebooting Camp Hyanto. The church book room, after a lot of focus, after a study by the Queen's Business School, after a lot of things that were done, it proved that the business model for us as the last of the book rooms in this part of the province, that it was simply something that we were not able to financially sustain. The other area that we turned was to our national church proportional gift, our gift to General Synod. General Synod asks for 26% of our assessable income as their proportional gift, as it's called. And so that's something the Diocese of Ontario had always been fairly faithful in doing. One of the few dioceses in the country that maintained it at that level. But what came clear to us is that that was not sustainable for us. So the decision was made, and over 2 years, we reduced our proportional gift from 26%, which was over $400,000, down to 20%. And the reason that 20% was picked was because that's the level that our churches provide to the diocese as CMM. And so that reduced the gift over 2 years from 26 to 20, and in doing so, dropped about $100,000 from our support for the national church. That was done a couple of years ago. With that as context, you look at where our operating income comes. So I actually went back to 2010 and compared it to 2021 and 2022. And as you can see, there was a slight up in 2021, which is based on 2019 incomes. But what you see is 2022 actually now drops down pretty close to what it was in 2010. So in 12 years, our income has, in 10,000 on 1.6 million, is basically stayed flat. The other interesting part of this, though, what we were doing as a strategy was to decrease the reliance on CMM. Because obviously, as we have gone by, our costs continue to go up by inflation. They go up by things that we shift and do. They go up by things that occur, but our top line has stayed the same. We've not changed the 20% factor in CMM. That has not changed in quite a fair memory. So CMM, while the rate has been flat, the actual amount as a share of the budget has gone from 84% of income. This year in 2021, it'll be 78%. Next year, it'll slim a little bit more to 77%. That's part of a strategy we have had to increase the amount from our income that comes from investments, from fees, from donations, and from other income, not just from CMM. And so that's how we've managed to hold our top line flat through this period. We did discuss this at the pre-synod meeting, so I'm not going to go through this in detail. But our income for this is looking at 2021. Our income has been up slightly. Of course, each year we do our budgeted CMM based upon not having a full sets of the green sheets and that in. So CMM was actually up slightly from the budget, down from 2020, but at the end of the day, our income was up $23,000. Our expenses, of course, benefited, while there was a lot of other things because of COVID. Obviously a lot of programs didn't run. A lot of traveling didn't happen. Our Synod costs are lower. There's a whole lot of things that netted about a $40,000 improvement in our expenses because of COVID. We did some restructuring. We did consolidation, and we continue to streamline our processes. We've continued to streamline staffing and the roles in the office. We've continued to build towards a forward structure. We've done things like made an investment in the archives to what we've now called Archives 2.0. You can see that in the expo, which is still open, but we've now recreated our diocesan archives. And then we've invested a fair bit in our financial systems. And so those are the investments we've made this year to allow us to drive efficiencies, but also to increase the capacity as we talk about taking on more for parishes. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And then finally, we benefited from increased subsidies. The wage subsidy, the same as all of your churches benefited. So did the diocesan staff and payroll. The rent subsidy, which we were entitled to. And then General Synod has granted back 1 month. And so that's about $25,000. So net, we've seen about $95,000 of extra income come in that has helped us in 2021. Again, this chart you have seen before. I'm not going to dwell on it other than the reason we do a budget is that it is, at the end of the day, it's a fiscal tool that helps drive us on our spiritual goals. It's about transparency, it's about being responsible, and it's about ensuring that the balances that are struck are the ones that we, from a governance perspective, that lines up with where we want to go. So if you simplify what the diocesan budget, the operating budget does, the word is support. And there's 3 areas that are supported. And I'll spend a moment on each. Parishes, ministries, and governance. Parishes are our parishes are supported in many ways. No 2 churches are alike. We have very large churches. We have very small churches. We have churches that have different demographics of people. We have people that have skill sets and passions in certain areas. We have churches that are in a wide range of financial states. Some of our churches have the financial resources and the human resources to do a lot of things on their own. For example, we have a couple of churches that do PAGs on their own. They have the resources to be able to do so. We have a lot of churches that don't. We have churches that have the people that can do charity returns, the T3010s for the Canadian Revenue Agency to keep your charity number. There's others that don't. We have people that can deal with insurance, and then we have churches that don't. We deal with a lot of HR and legal, and that's not only how we handle it internally, but the external assistance we need. So when the call comes and you're having an issue with your secretary or with your admin or with your maintenance person, janitor, with your organist, those things happen in our churches. Those supports are there. There's support there as churches hit difficulties and as we hit inflection points. The bishop mentioned yesterday some of the new ministry models and how we set up new shared ministry and regional ministry and some of those types of places, so types of models. So that brings resources from the diocese in place. And that brings in people like Wayne Varley and the bishop and myself. It brings in consulting when we need it with specialized resources. And in some cases, financial support as we work our way through those. Gananoque, can you go on mute?
Just run it. Welcome, Gananoque. It's great to have you here. We're just in the middle of the budget presentation, so we're just going to pop you on mute, but Thanks, and I think Canon Michael Reed made his way down to Gananoque to get our friends there online. So glad to see you and hear you, and glad you can see and hear us.
So those models, and some of your churches recently have been through those as we've set up new ministry models. In other places, as churches and parishes and adapt and regions, we're supporting in areas like there's no longer really, in many cases, a need for a central treasurer. That the diocese can now offer the ability to split all of your various expenses and do that without having to have a central treasurer. And we've implemented the systems and the processes to be able to do that. The warden and treasurer calls, the bishop, as we keep count, 39 we've had during the pandemic. But that is about the community of wardens and treasurers. That's about communicating. It's about supporting what's happened. Not always happy things as we've gone through this. There is interim and supply ministry that comes. Venerable Wayne Varley has done a number of stints of extended interim ministry in churches that have needed it. And that's come, again, because we have that resource in place, and a lot of it is funded by the diocesan budget. We have the issues that happen when things happen in churches. There are disagreements. We've had a fire, a major fire. We've had large property issues. We have a number of things that happen, and there's people and resources, not just the staff, but specialized resources that stand behind us and the financing to make them there. And then we have the investment funds. And let's be honest, in these days, to have a fund that basically is very, very secure and produces 5% income, that is not an easy step. And that there is a strong group that takes care of making sure that that indeed is in place. Finally, is that when churches hit those difficult points, and we have a number every year, one of the things that the diocesan budget supports is forgiveness. So we have a viability plan process. We work through with the church. We look at their viability. They look at their viability. And then as required, there is support for forgiveness of some of the debt that they owe to the diocese for CMM, for payroll, for other things that have accumulated. It helps get a church back on its feet, and it helps lift that heavy load that those churches often feel that stops them from moving forward because of what they bear. There's support for ministries. Of course, the bishop is a ministry. The bishop is the chief pastor for the diocese. The bishop is out in churches on a regular basis. There's supporting of the clergy, and whether that's through things like the bishop, things like through Wayne and his office, through our EFAP programs, through our benefit plans that are managed, and those types of things. Support for the clergy and their ministry. Support for our cathedral ministry. The cathedral is our mother church. And you know, I think one of the things that becomes apparent that cathedrals in every diocese have like a love-hate relationship. And sometimes people love to hate, and sometimes they just love. So as we work our way through, we have a grant that is by canon in place. Each year, that grant is reviewed. And looking at not just that the cathedral provides us with a building as they have through Synod, but that the cathedral, the dean, and the programs of the cathedral offer ministry to the rest of the diocese. And we know that when we've consulted in the past that people value that ministry and that leadership. We looked at this year in particular, and as you know, the cathedral is going through change. And it was felt this year, for example, that it would be a very inappropriate time to adjust that because the cathedral is about, finally working through with the wonderful interim ministry of the Venerable David Seltzer. They have Archdeacon Colin Johnson assisting their search. And so with all of that, this is not the time with a new dean and a new ministry beginning to look at reducing. We support groups of the diocese. You've heard from them, the Green Group, the Doors Group, all of the different groups that are supporting ministry. New ministry support and development, the coordination for those reach and stretch grants. Communications you see every week and every couple of months with the dialogue, with e-news, bishops' messages. Provincial Synod. One of our big lines is the national church. We support the national church. Yes, that supports the primate's office and the general secretary, but it also mostly goes to supporting the Church of the North, supporting our indigenous ministries, and goes to supporting the global church. Finally, we support governance. Synod Council, Synod, audit, which is a large piece because it says that our financials go through a major review by an independent certified auditor, that we are compliant with generally accepted accounting principles, and that we meet the Canadian laws for a charity. We have our canons, constitution, and governance, which sometimes is as we work our way through, but with the not-for-profit legislation now coming into effect in the province, a big thing for us. And of course, legally, we have to defend ourselves on occasion. So the budget process, we look at the financial factors. What's inflation look like? What do we expect that we know is going to happen from the markets? We take a look at our staffing every year and look at where that is and what the costs are going to look like there. We look at our fixed costs and we review them against benchmarks and alternatives. So I mentioned earlier about our landlord. There's an area where we look at each year at what our costs look like and how that compares. Now the reality is that we are, from a practical perspective, still locked in for a number of years. The costs to be able to move would far exceed any savings that would be gained. Basically, though, each year we meet with our real estate professionals, Cushman Wakefield, and look at what is going on in the market. And we've looked at other buildings that similar to this with a cost structure. We're $26 all in per square foot. That's all in. And so that is very competitive with buildings. In fact, downtown it's even less, with more competitive because we have parking included. So we satisfy ourselves that there's not a gain to be made. If we could make money by moving, we would do so. We look for cost savings everywhere with a business case against it. We look at major events. This year, for example, Lambeth and Synod, General Synod, we have costs for that. We look at grants. I spoke of the cathedral for a moment and the grant that's there. We look at the gifts that we provide. We look at the grants that go out for new ministry in parishes, the curacy grants, the new ministry grants. We look at CMM and our investment income. Cash, right? So all of our expenses, most of them, and I'll talk about this in a minute, are mostly in cash. So we're very careful planning for cash because you can be positive on the bottom line, but negative on cash and run out of money to meet your expenses. Anybody that's running a business knows that. And finally, we always view it in terms of how are we moving with our vision and our strategy? Are we continuing on those with that tree? Are we continuing the maintenance to mission shift? So the 2022 budget is about challenges. We recognize that. What we've tried to do is a balance between the short term, the midterm, and the long term. Synod Council, this isn't something that just comes to Council at the end. Synod Council early in the year began with updates on where we are in the process and what kinds of decisions and direction we're making, discussing the challenges, looking at the options, looking at the approach, and then Council ratified this budget proposal and approved it to be sent here to Synod. So if you really look at where the key pieces are in here, there's a number of areas that increased. Next year will be our 5th year in our lease, and that brings an automatic rent. It's about $1 a square foot. It's around $10,000 to $15,000 a year. We see, and that's the first, by the way, we've seen in 5 years. It'll be the last we see for the next 5. We do with new ministry and curacy support. We have increased the amount of money going into churches to support new ministry, and we have more curacies in place. We have programs restarting, right? We know that we're going to start spending money there again. We continue to draw money out of our infrastructure. We're continuing to drive cost reduction programs and continuing to consolidate there. So there's savings there. We have the one-timers I mentioned, like Lambeth, every 10 years. General Synod, every 3 years. And of course, this year we have an additional staff benefit due to a specific circumstance. Happy on that one. So, and finally, as we know that because 2020 income was down slightly in our churches, net because of COVID, that our CMM will be down with it. And that because we have restructured around insurance, because we pay $250,000 up front, last year we elected to take that money from our investments and not from the line of credit. So it's decreased our investment or our interest paid, but increases, also decreases our income. So I'm not going to dwell on the numbers. It breaks it into the major areas. What you see is our income is down just under $50,000. The cost in the bishop, clergy, lay support, parish ministry, and program support are up. And again, those are things that relate to the things we've talked about. Up about $63,000. The business finance admin side is basically flat. And then the things that go outside our diocese, again, due to Lambeth and due to General Synod, that 1 month that we had free, they're up. So we're calling for a net deficit of $118,000 for next year. And of course, that is, we have not run a deficit in a number of years. That is concerning. Let's not kid ourselves. So I want to explore that for just a moment. First of all, as I mentioned earlier about cash, almost all of our churches, with a couple of exceptions, operate on a cash basis. Your books can be legally kept one of two ways. You base everything on as money comes in and money goes, then you count it. And that's what most of our churches count. Businesses generally run on a accrual basis. And accrual says, not only do I count what's just come in, but I know what bills I've received. I hold assets. So we record things on a balance sheet. Most churches don't record a balance sheet. You don't own the buildings and assets, so most churches don't anyway. But we carry assets on the books. Because we carry assets on the book, we have to do what's called amortization. Right? We write things. So when we moved in this building, we did leasehold improvements. We paid for it in cash in the year we did it. Contractors had to be paid. But as we move forward, we depreciate it over 5 years. Right? And so there's a chunk of our costs in our budget that are not cash costs. Those are financing, those are paper, book-based. They are still real costs. They still are counted in our financial statements, but they're not an expenditure of cash. And there's two areas there. One is there's $40,000 of amortization or depreciation of assets. We're still writing off some assets at Camp Hyanto that were put in, and that because they had 10-year lives. So that'll end, of course, when we sell it. But that $40,000 in the budget, there's another $15,000 that is viability plan forgiveness. That's money that we paid out on the church's behalf some time ago, or we recorded as a receivable several years ago that we're not going to get as cash. But when we write it off, right, when that's done as part of a forgiveness plan, and that's $15,000 of the budget goes to that each year to build up that fund, that's a book transaction, not cash. So of that 118, 55 of it is not really cash in terms of affecting how we operate. So Council looked at a number of ways that we could deal with that deficit. One is, looking at them all, is to increase income. And that's by increasing CMM, and that would, of course, take an active synod, and increasing fees. But we all know that churches, as we come through the other side of COVID, that would be a very difficult thing to do, and not necessarily in any way, shape, or form the right thing to do. We could simply draw down investments to pay that. And in doing so, we would reduce our income again the following years. We could look at the Ministry Allocation Fund that we talked yesterday where the reach and stretch grants come from. We could take money out of that with council's approval. We can do further reductions. You can bring the budget down by taking money out of those three areas we support: parishes, ministries, and governance. Can make reductions. And then finally, we looked at the option of taking the surplus from 2021, which is quite large because of the, first of all, because we ran an operating benefit, and then we had that $90,000 of money that was come in as subsidies from one source and another, and carry that over into 2022. And this is a tactic used a lot by municipalities to balance one year against the other. And that looks at it and says, stay the course, stay on the plan, and look at this over 2 years. So take the saving from this year, much as many of us are doing at home, and applying it to next year. That, of course, is the option that was recommended to council. That is the option that council has put forward to Synod. So graphically, the deficit we talked about, $117,000. And the budget, or sorry, the projected surplus this year is $137 when you count those subsidies. So obviously at this point, that sits down, and what we're really proposing is that we would use the two, carry across the 2021 surplus, carry it across on the books as a reserve, use that to support the projected budget deficit in 2022. This was done for many years in the old diocesan budget. It leaves the balance for contingencies, and of course, as I mentioned, there's $55,000 in there that isn't cash. So the other roughly $60,000 would come out of that, basically the money that has come in from the government and the national church saving. So to kind of wind this up, this is about the longer term. It's about continuing the journey. Right? We're a long way from the beginning. Even, you go back to 1862, but you go back to the more recent beginning in 2011, 2010. We're a long way from the end, right? And we continue to serve as those before us did and those that follow us will. So we continue to shift income, and we look to continue that, recognizing that some of our churches have declined and will continue to. We have to continue to focus on stewardship, right? In terms of ensuring that we are the best users of what we have and that we also optimize what we give. We look at our operating costs and we continue to drive efficiency. Look at as opportunities arise and challenges pop up, we deal with them. We have to expand support. We know that churches are seeing more and more in human resources that are stepping back and not accessible anymore as much as financial. And that's areas, as the bishop mentioned yesterday, where we're looking at being able to offer bookkeeping services, where the wardens still control, but we maintain the books. And then, as we heard yesterday as well, driving and focusing on ministry, what Bishop Bill talked about, what Bishop Michael talked about, and what the Reach and Stretch brought. Looking at those needs, looking at those opportunities, looking at what we have, and both building partnerships and building things ourselves. So the summary is we're really looking at this, and we heard yesterday about coming from a pandemic, coming from the trauma that we have been through, right? And therefore look at this as we have the pandemic. Nobody talks about the pandemic of 2021. We talk about 2020, 2021, probably 2022. This is a multi-year event that we're living through. So take the long view. Live through the one-time costs that we'll have next year and continue to adopt and evolve and nurture as we work through. And then finally is about caring. As we heard from Bishop Bill that we have to care, regardless of differences in opinion. right? Regardless of the differences in our churches, regardless of the differences sometimes in our ideology or approach, and difference in the resources that are available, that we care for our churches, we care for our ministries, and as we emerge from the pandemic, we carry on with the calling that we're all called to, as we've heard so eloquently yesterday. So in conclusion, it's, the recommendation is, and the budget that you have in front of you is recommending to stay the course, to stay nimble, and if things change, we continue to be nimble with it. Council will continue to govern that through. And then finally is to continue to provide support, both to our ministries, to our churches, and to our governance. So I know it's taken a few minutes, and I thank you for that. It is, again, trying to look at this from the larger and more strategic perspective. You have in your circular the narrative budget and the detail line-by-line budget, but this was intended to really bring it to you from a strategic and governance perspective. With that, Bishop, the motion that is in the circular.
Thank you very much, Alec, for your presentation and for all the work with those who are working with you on getting that ready to come before Synod today.